Okay, perhaps I can advance this. Oh, here we go. Great. Thank you. So, great to be with you here in Lagos today. I'm Rupert, I'm from Microsoft. I wanted to talk to you briefly around a topic that we see being of great interest when it comes to AI in financial services today. So right now, across the whole financial services industry globally, organizations are spending about $600 billion on IT. And we see some terrific outcomes from that. So we see things like Ziva, and we can chat to get banking services. As a retail customer, I can get onboarded in next to no time using AI and so forth. So I feel like technology has boosted productivity. And if I'm a staff member in a large bank, it also feels like a lot of productivity uplift has taken place. But when we actually look at the productivity statistics, the interesting thing is that over the last 10 years, there hasn't been a big shift in productivity in terms of the cost to operate accounts and the head count that it requires to do that. And when we speak anecdotally to our customers around the world and ask them why they think that is, they tell us one of the big challenges they face is dealing with compliance requests. And so I wanted to talk about some of the applications we're seeing for AI inside of compliance. And today, we see a great deal of activity taking place in the area of fraud detection, as you can imagine. So this is one of our biggest workloads. In fact, it is our biggest workload all up for AI in the cloud today is fraud detection on transactions. And some of the more innovative applications go beyond typical analysis of transactional information, and they look to privately share information between banks in a country. The second area of application links to what we've seen from a lot of the Zechathon participants today, and that goes to credit decisioning, credit models, early default predictions, and so forth. So there's a ton happening in that space, in the risk space. And then if you're working in the capital markets part of your business, then you've got to deal with things like market risk and so forth. You typically have to run complex calculations, and AI is helping there to make sure we can run computations faster to figure out what our risk positions might be. So earlier today, we heard a bit about generative AI and what's happening in that space, and this is really where we're starting to get excited about the possibility to address some of those productivity challenges that exist inside of the compliance space. And so I wanted to give you a few practical examples of what we're seeing customers do today in that space. And the first is to question what we could do if we could align to policy and regulation faster. So we know you get infrequent communications with major policy updates. So CBN maybe comes out with a new KYC regulation every few years, as they did last year. But what about all those circulars and so forth that you're getting every single day that you have to snap to? Sanctions, regulatory requirements, and so forth. How do you ingest those and how do you decide on those? Those take lots of people to align to your internal controls and policy requirements and figure out, have I got gaps that I need to fill to comply with that regulation? So today, we're seeing a lot of activity in analyzing that regulation, mapping that to internal controls and policy, and figuring out where are the gaps and what I need to address faster. So here's one example, a policy assistant from one of our partners, PwC, that does exactly that, policy analysis. So let's switch gears to financial crime and AML and suspicious activity reporting. So when we deal with our tier 1 customers, and here's an example of ABN AMRO Bank based in the Netherlands, they've been using some of our tooling to enable the analysis of transactions that are flowing through to figure out, is this something that needs to be reported or not? And if you look at the stats, there's some interesting things in there, but one of them is that they've got 2,500 analysts working on analyzing those transactions and reporting them in. So now you can start to see where some of that productivity challenge steps through when we have to have that number of people busy doing the analysis of suspicious activities and transactions. And so we can give them state-of-the-art data analysis tools, but can we perhaps go a little bit further with generative AI? And so this is what we're working on with a number of customers, which is to say, can we feed through the information related to the customer interaction, which might be their request to make the payment. There could be some interactions with the contact center and so forth. Could be some kind of transcription. There could be some received information if we're receiving the payment. And can we actually do some of that agent work for you using an approach which we call an agentic approach? So this means we've got multiple AI technologies working together to deliver this outcome. And if you look on the side of the screen here, we've actually got 3 that work together. So the one reviews the transaction pattern, the interactions, the customer documents and so forth, and looks for evidence of money laundering with reference to some of the required regulations in market. And it decides, yes, there may be something of concern here, or perhaps there isn't. Where there is, it goes to the next agent. So agent here means AI, not a person. And so it goes to the suspicious activity writer, and that writes up the report and writes a narrative which is suitable for submission to the local regulator. And then we need to see, did it do a good job? So we have a final check to say, did this whole process work, and we've got an acceptable outcome. And so we put it to an approver AI agent, and finally it lands with a human person who has a quick review of what's there and decides whether or not to submit it. So in this way, we get into the point where some fairly deep, heavy lifting that various analysts within the business have to tackle is being taken through and being automated. And I heard a lot of software engineers and developers and so forth in the audience who stood up with questions. So there's a GitHub example down the bottom right there if you want to look at that. So that's one example. Let's take some high-risk processes. So what about, say, the lending process, where you have a responsibility to do a bunch of steps and comply with a bunch of regulation before you finally issue a loan? Now, some of those steps can be encapsulated in the formal documentation that surrounds the loan. So did you capture affordability criteria? Did you analyze it properly? Did the tooling help you do that? But of course, surrounding that is a whole lot of other information. There's a discussion between someone and the customer potentially, if this is happening face-to-face or online. There's also some unstructured data and so forth that supports these processes. So typically what you've got is an internal audit department, and they'll go through and pick out 5% of those loans, or 1% or 0.5%, and say, hey, can I figure out if there was an issue with those? And that gives me an idea whether I've got a problem or not. But where we see we're actually going today with these types of technologies is we can apply technology to assess the compliance associated with each one of these processes that take place. And we can do that in such a way that we can move from checking things on a test basis to checking every single interaction that we have with a customer. And the beauty of AI in these types of situations is that we can have evolving policies, we can have evolving regulations, and we can ask the AI to assess the compliance of the transaction according to those evolving regulations, and we're not reliant on necessarily retraining and reskilling teams to make sure they have those in sight. So, of course, as Microsoft, we're busy doing these things internally, and we're doing a lot of AI-related process optimization. But here's one that's applied in a similar way to the example I've just shown you. So as Microsoft, we do deals with large organizations like Zenith Bank, First Bank, and other corporations around the world. And because they're unique and they have their own specialized requirements, we end up authoring specialized, unique agreements to suit their needs. But at the same time, we've got to be particularly careful to make sure that we can actually deliver on what we're promising in those, that they're compliant with local regulation and so forth. And so we've done exactly this. We've dropped in an AI agent that looks at each of the deals that we do, reviews what's been done, and says, is there an issue here or not that perhaps needs to be looked into? And so you can see a 23% reduction in the time taken to do this. And this is indicative of the types of savings that we're seeing with using these types of technologies through these processes. Now, another area that's a great deal of pain for many of our customers is corporate KYC and onboarding. So I've been dealing recently with a customer in Europe. They're in 20 jurisdictions. And to just do corporate KYC, 700 staff employed to deliver on corporate KYC across those jurisdictions, and they still don't deliver a particularly awesome service back to those corporate customers. So if I want to be onboarded for a new corporate product, corporate line of credit, something like that, I'm waiting weeks and perhaps even a month or two to move through all the processes that have to be handled, and there's complex regulation around the types of entity, whether they are regulated in different ways and which jurisdictions they're in. So right across all these areas, we're seeing a lot of interest and success in addressing some of the bottlenecks that exist in these processes here. So this is all great, and you can see that there's potential to deliver on a lot of the challenges that are faced by the compliance departments. But not everyone can necessarily benefit from having a strong IT team and strong funding to be able to tackle their challenges. So right across the business are small pockets and small teams, pockets of folks who have to deal with these types of challenges and are perhaps not going to get the love from central IT organization or their line of business IT organization to help them automate their particular process. So as Microsoft, we're starting to think about how do we put productivity tools in the hands of those small teams so that they can apply them themselves to be able to automate their processes and optimize. And what I've done today is to give you a very simple example which I've created myself, which relates to a banking complaint. So in this case, we've got a situation where a complaint arrives by email. This is a formal complaint, so I've dealt with the line of business and I couldn't get assistance, and this relates to some interest charge on my checking account or something like that. So the complaint needs to be logged, and we need to figure out what is the customer complaining about, and then we need to evaluate that complaint against the bank's policy on complaints. Maybe it doesn't comply. Maybe they didn't report it soon enough. Maybe this is something which relates to a third party which we can't help with. And then, in many markets, the banking ombud or the regulator may publish a history of the complaints for the year, and they say to banks in the market, read this document and make sure that as you evaluate your complaints, you snap to the findings that we've had in this particular area. And so all up, then you'll evaluate the case on its merits, you'll look at other supporting information, and then maybe you're going to draft a response and do some kind of 4 eyes check or something like that. So we have, say, 20 people or 25 or 30 people inside the bank who have to struggle with this type of process day in, day out. And furthermore, we have to make sure our staff are briefed on these policies and on the publications that might have come from the ombud. So, without any code, we give people tools to automate this type of the process. And the answer is we're hoping that we are at the point where we can deliver this sort of tooling. So here, I've designed a flow process which says this is what we want to do. Find new complaints, summarize them and figure out what the person is saying, check if it complies with our policy, check if it may relate to any of the previous findings from the ombud, go and find any transactions that might relate to what the customer is talking about, save me the effort of pulling it out, and then go and draft a response back to the customer that I can check and decide whether it can go back. And can I do this all myself? I don't have an IT team that's going to calculate the ROI to come and spend time with me and build this for me. So this is what we're thinking about doing. These are the types of things that sit underneath each of these blocks. So English language sits underneath each of these blocks to tell it what to do. And so here I've written a complaint. I've written a complaint on behalf of my client. He believes interest charged to his account in the last 2 weeks of January wasn't right, and it might have violated some rules regarding the charge of interest, and the client doesn't have any access to mail, so he can't submit it himself. And so what's happened here now is that process that you just saw a moment ago, it's actually grabbed that complaint and it's generated a response via AI, and first of all it's done a summary of the complaint, then it's read the ombuds document, which is a 60-page document, read all the cases and said these are the ones that might apply here, this is what you should worry about, and so it briefs the agent on potential regulatory considerations. And it goes further than that in that it can actually go and extract the transactions that are associated with that particular complaint, and it can actually author a response back to the the customer. So these are the types of things we hope will shift the goalposts in terms of what can be achieved from a compliance perspective with AI in organizations in the years coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rupert Nicolay, for your presentation. Very insightful this afternoon.
Absolutely. Well.